All right, good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. The Sociology Club is really proud to host this careers panel. We like to do one every semester because we know sociology students love sociology. They love talking about controversial issues and delving into different social problems. But once they've found this passion, the next question of like, what do I do with the degree though, is definitely a challenge. In part because there's so many options. Sociology is such a broad field. You can go into just about anything that you can imagine, and it can provide you with a good foundation. So this semester, our panel includes Professor Yvette Letellier, who is actually in our sociology department as well and teaches the human services course. Is there another one that you teach, Yvette?
Not currently. That's primarily the course.
Okay, so Yvette is a social worker. We also have Shannon Davis from here, LA. She's an urban planner. And we have Janine Pierce, former city councilwoman from the city of Long Beach, does lots of work with nonprofits. And I was struggling to figure out what title would you like me to give you, because I feel like you wear many hats.
I do wear many hats. I guess consultant is fine.
Okay.
Political strategic consultant. I don't know. I do too much.
Yeah. And for Janine, correct me if I'm wrong, right? I think environmental issues especially are one of what you focus on, right? For policy and consulting. All right. Okay. And so Jayani, the vice president of the Sociology Club, is actually going to be doing the questioning for today. Hey, Sarah. Sarah is a success coach for the behavioral and social sciences career pathways here at Cerritos College. So if you guys have any questions, feel free to message her as well. But otherwise, I'm going to hand it over to Jayani to lead us with the questions.
Yeah, so hi everybody. Thank you for being here. I'll start off right away for the first question. So my first question is regarding your position. So please describe your position and the work that you do. And any of the panelists can start us off with that.
I'll go ahead, Janine. I saw that you are muted, but I'll go ahead and start. My name is Shannon Davis. I'm co-director of Here LA, and we are an urban planning, urban design consulting firm located in Los Angeles. We do a lot of projects kind of throughout Southern California and kind of creep up the coast, and we're working a little bit in Seattle now as well. And so the majority of what we do has to do with urban design. So that means designing anything from the streets that you walk on to the parks that you hang out in, and kind of all of that in between. There's so much within the field of urban planning that it encompasses, everything from sustainability to transportation design to open space and open field design. We can kind of talk about that later, but generally the position and the type of work that I do is I work with government agencies. I work with LA Metro or cities of Long Beach, city of LA, city of Pasadena, West Hollywood, etc. And there are projects that come out of the cities that have to do with improving the streets and the neighborhood and the community. And we do a lot of the kind of design work that comes out of that. So the day-to-day changes every day, but generally that's the sum of what we're doing at Here at LA.
I can go. So as mentioned, Janine Pierce, prior city councilwoman, graduate from Cal State Long Beach, sociology. And today I own my own firm. It's called Fierce Courage. I formed it as I was leaving the council, knowing that my background had really been in labor and community organizing. And then I went into the basically service industry, as I call it, as a city council member, and wanting to really take those skills and make sure that they were accessible to nonprofits that maybe had a smaller budget than some of the larger nonprofits, but also wanting to center all of the work on climate, which Joy mentioned. And so whether my Consultant clients today, I have 9 different ones. 2 of them are political clients. So I help them with their political strategy. What agenda items are they looking to bring forward on the council? What pushback might they receive? Where are people that they can build coalition with, and then get into the weeds on public policy with them. I have other ones that are infrastructure projects, like we're looking at doing an aerial tram in the city of Long Beach. How can we work to get that on certain infrastructure lists so that we can identify funding for that? Most recently, I have a client that is actually working in the country of Belize to help them with their green bonds. So really, I come in as a strategist to try to help people achieve public policy that primarily is around climate change. My background is winning political campaigns at the ballot. It takes a lot of work. It's very exhausting. And so I keep trying to back away from that, but I keep getting roped back in. That's a little bit, and definitely every day is very, very different. And I would say, sociology is really at the core of it because it's the lens that we do the work with. And I think that's what you find in sociology. Sometimes people are like, what is a sociology degree? It's the lens, it's the questions, it's understanding inequities in the world and how you close those gaps. And so trying to do that with all of my clients. So, and thank you guys for inviting me on. Appreciate it.
Hi, everybody. I'm Yvette Letelier. I have my master's in social work. And in the last 17 years that I've worked in the field, I've worked with foster homes, adoptive homes. I'm currently working with victims of crime, so primarily domestic violence, as a therapist. So I'm recently starting to do my licensure hours. So that's going to be a good number of hours ahead. It's about 3,000, a little over 3,000 hours. I do everything part-time. I'm also an instructor at Cerritos and at ELAC, and I love the flexibility of my path. Like, I think one of the beauties of sociology is that you can kind of pivot into other areas and explore new spaces. And so I also have my hands in a couple different pots, but it really matches my personality. I think I like to kind of be all over the place. And so teaching, social work, therapy, victims of crime, that's kind of my path at this point.
Awesome. Great panel, Jenny. I don't know, you're muted. I don't know if you're.
Oh, sorry. Do we have one more panelist? I thought we had one
No,
more.
just the 3 today. Then
Oh.
you'll find that'll be plenty for the time we have.
Okay, so my next question is, why did you choose to major in sociology?
Should we go? I guess I'll go. We'll go in that order. So I actually started off not in sociology. So I started off studying film, and I wanted to be a film editor. And slowly over time realized that, it didn't have as direct of an impact as I wanted, in terms of, just feeling like I was part of the community and part of change that was happening in my community. And I stumbled upon sociology. And I had an incredible professor at the school that I went to, and she really made me fall in love with understanding how people interact in different physical spaces. So sociology is, the study of human social relationships, but it's also, when you kind of transfer it to physical spaces, the physical location of a plaza or an open space or a park really impact how your community comes together, or where there's a hub, or where you can hang out, or where you feel safe, or where you find agency to do X, Y, and Z that you want in the world. And I was really fascinated by the kind of the link between social relationships and then the physical manifestation of that in our cities and in our communities. And I love large cities. I've always kind of enjoyed and been fascinated by how different cities and different physical manifestations of cities change how we feel in certain situations. And so I fell in love with sociology for that reason. I also was minoring at the time in political science and queer studies, and it was just kind of a nice way to kind of blend this idea of having strong impact and working within the community as a way of doing good in the world. And so I love the agency that, sociology kind of gave me as a student when I was learning about how my different social networks kind of blended together and fit together, and then how, that impacted my physical space around me and around the community that I chose to live in. So that's why I chose to continue down the sociology path. And it continues to fascinate me, the psychological reasoning for why we move the way we do through cities is very interesting. And I think that that's a direct link to how we all kind of interact socially together as a people.
Great, thanks, Shannon. So my path to sociology was long. I have a non-traditional background, which meant that it took me 10 years of putting myself through college before I was able to graduate. It meant that I went to 3 junior colleges, and before I moved to California, I went to University of Houston for 1 semester. I'd always wanted to go there, and so I knew I was moving to California, but I wanted to go and take one professor's class. And so I did women's studies there and history class with a radical historian that was Marxist and, was always in trouble by the faculty union or, somebody in the college. And it was there that I learned really about the power of collective action, which is what I had been doing as a kid. My mother was very active. I'm from a small town outside of Houston. She married many people with marginalized identities of different races and backgrounds. She was queer, had 2 long-term girlfriends. And so I grew up watching my mom kind of fight the good fight and be herself in a city that was very racist and very different. But I had never had an academic understanding of that. My high school was not great. Wasn't supposed to even graduate kind of thing, but put myself through, got to University of Houston, fell in love with the idea of collective organizing, and ended up kind of chipping away at different classes. And I remember my first class at Cal State Long Beach was globalization, and again, the power of place and how it matters. And it's so fascinating now with COVID and how different we operate. We're all on Zoom right now. Our realities are very different. How we interact and build trust with people is different. But I started organizing with hotel workers in Long Beach. And it really was the lens of what I was learning in sociology about the haves and have-nots that really inspired me to make sociology my degree instead of history. So I think that's it in a nutshell. I could talk longer, but I'll be sure these discussions will get more tofu as we go on.
So in high school, I took a class. It was 1 semester of social justice, and my mind was blown. Like up until that semester, I don't think I had ever been introduced to, I don't even want to say the idea, but the term and what did this mean? And I felt like I got really hungry for whatever this was. And so I went to Cal State Northridge, started as Soc, went to Psych, did Spanish Lit because I wanted to teach Spanish Lit at the high school level, went back to sociology, discovered women's studies, and then again, my mind was blown. And then Chicano studies and my mind was blown. And so I feel like identity has been a really big part of my educational path because as we know, I think there's much more awareness at this point, but we're only taught like a single narrative as we're growing. And then I went to college and it was like, wow, like there's a reflection of who I am in these spaces. And so I really like dove into that. So ultimately it took me 6 years because I think I was so hungry for the information that I did double major in sociology, women's studies, and a minor, 1 class shy of a triple major with Chicano studies. And so that's really what took me into that path.
Okay, so my next question for you guys is, what are the best and most challenging aspects of your job?
Okay, I'll start. So the reason that I went into urban planning as an offshoot of sociology was because I wanted to use both the analytical part of my brain as well as the kind of creative and design part of my brain as well. And when I stumbled upon urban planning, which was introduced to me by my sociology professor that I previously spoke about, I realized that, you could do both. So on the day-to-day, it can range from strategic planning and coming up with different ways for agencies to apply for funding for changes or improvements to a biking path, for example. And on the next day or within that same day, I'll be, sitting down with trace paper and designing a street and using kind of mathematical calculations to come up with several designs for, the next streetscape iteration of a boulevard, et cetera. So I love that there's a nice balance kind of both parts of my brain, and that I get to use my hands and draw and explore my work through that way. And in that sense, what I love about what I do is that it's different every day. And I'd say we're probably working on about 10 to 15 different projects at a time. And so there are lots of different aspects of project management and business development and design and strategy that are all kind of happening at the same time. And it just keeps me engaged and excited and, just ready to kind of tackle different problems. And I love that about the work that we do. I'd say one of the most challenging aspects of the job is kind of related to that. Because it's different every day, there isn't like a formula that, that I can apply to projects that I work on. And because, the type of work that we strive to do is responsive to the community, you can't apply a formula to what a community wants. You really have to listen, and you have to engage and understand, and then take what you're hearing from the community and turn it into design, and then talk to community members who know their community better than you do or better than I do, to make sure that this is what they want to see. And so I think that's a pretty challenging aspect of the job, but it also is super rewarding when it's done right. So that's my quick response to that.
I love it. Okay, so because I have so many different clients, I really want to step back and take a comment about what it is that I feel like I really do, which is systems change, right? When we learn about sociology, it's how are we changing systems, whether it's like Shannon changing roads or whether it's changing the home that somebody is living in. It's really, how do we change the system to make sure it's working for those that it hasn't worked for before? So in my prior work, my day-to-day was being a community organizer, and it was having one-on-ones with 10 to 15 people a week and really trying to articulate where the gap was in inequity, whether it was a hotel worker or whether it was someone that lived by the 710. Building trust is what I would say is the hardest part about being somebody that's in politics and systems change. Because like Shannon mentioned, you have to have a relationship, get feedback from somebody, and then you have to be authentic to that feedback while you go into a space to create change, because the only way that we make change is when all those stakeholders are together. And so I think that's where sociology really gave me a lens, not to mention my upbringing in Texas. One project I'd like to highlight is we're in the middle of building something called the Climate Council. And so my experience, I had 10 years of working with labor, and every labor union is treated differently. My last year on council, I committed my time to climate change. And we attempted to pass a policy that gave the city the ability to determine where our energy came from. So right now, Edison delivers our energy, but we have no say as a city how much of it is wind or solar or any of the things that are clean energy. And we spent 4 years on a public policy campaign, research with the building trades at the table, with electricians at the table. And then in the last year, there was a leadership shift. And all of a sudden, the 4 years of work that we had done fell apart. And in the last 2 months before I left council, we were not able to win what is called community choice aggregation. So we took that moment to really take a step back and say, how can we address systems change now? And so we're building a coalition that has like the Sunrise Movement, but it also has grid alternatives and, Lane and different organizations that do this work with the intention of building with labor as well. And so the hardest part for me and all the work that I do, whether it's a council member or a consultant, it's holding together a coalition of people to be able to strive towards that same goal. and I love it. It is like in my blood, and I can't not do that work when I get other work that's like, we're doing surveys for Edison right now. Totally up with sociology, Allie, you know, how we created the surveys and everything, which is fine. But it's having those relationships where you're really trying to get people to understand that we, at the heart of things, are trying to move the same thing. And labor, a lot of them in the building trades are opposed to clean energy because their workers are oil workers. And so how do you have a conversation with them saying, look, we're not trying to take workers out of a job. We're trying to say, what does that transition look like while we build a new green economy? And if labor's not at the table in the beginning, then workers are going to have a low wage job. Like the installing of electric chargers, those jobs are $15 an hour. Those should not be $15 an hour jobs, right? Those are, I mean, you could get electrocuted. They're very dangerous. They take a lot of training. And it's because labor wasn't necessarily at the table in the beginning. And so that's like my pet project that I'm working alongside everything, but that's what I love most. The hardest part is it's not, you know, it's not a math equation. Personalities can change, but you have to really build trust. Doesn't mean you have to be friends with everybody, but they have to trust you and trust to come to a table that they'll be respected at. And that part is super fun, especially when it pays off and we win.
I feel like Janine kind of mentioned the parallels, but when Shannon was talking, I saw a lot of like the macro work that she might be doing or she is doing rather, and like more of the micro work that I might be doing with the therapy, right? Like you're doing this needs assessment, you're figuring it out, because I can come in with my own agenda, but that's not really going to serve anybody unless I say, what is it that you want to do? Like, I can't project my own intentions onto my clients. And so I thought that was kind of a beautiful way to, like, even though we're all doing very different things, maybe at the end of the day, we're doing very similar things, just in different capacities. And with social work, you can do macro work, but I just saw that parallel with the micro work. My days are all different as well, because clients are completely different. And so my intention is anytime I meet with a client right now, everything's telehealth, fortunately and unfortunately, is just to remind myself what an honor it is to hold that space with them, not for them, just with them. And the paperwork, the administrative stuff, that's something different, but what a privilege and honor it is for me to be able to share the space with each individual that I have. And I'm not saving anybody, right? That's not my role. I'm here to help others remember their light. That's essentially what it is. They have this light, and especially with domestic violence, I feel like sometimes we forget about our light, and it's how do we rekindle that light and how do we help people remember their own light? And so sometimes I like straight up even say, like, thank you for just letting me peek in for an hour a week into your lives. And it really is such an honor for my clients to share. And these are just it's one story, and there's like millions of stories that are to be told. And so I think what I love about social work is narratives, people's stories, and really being present to be able to hear it, really. Yeah. So every day is a little different. That's also kind of the beauty of it. It's like, well, where are we going today? What's it going to look like? And showing up for that.
I don't mind if I chime in, if that's okay. I just want to say, like, the root of it all is people's stories, you know, and I think that whether it's in organizing, whether you're in film, you're designing streets, being able to ask open-ended questions of people and hear their personal stories, that's where systems change comes from. And in urban planning in so many places, people don't get asked their real stories. Or let's be honest, in a bureaucratic system, I mean, my experience in the city of Long Beach has been fascinating because we can sometimes solicit all the personal stories, but you have bureaucrats that just want to look at numbers on a paper. And so it's, how do we use those stories to transcend some of the barriers to access, and being able to change systems so that somebody can really say that bike lane rocks my world, or I'm a small business and putting that bike lane there now means that I'm going to miss out, but if we don't have those personal stories, then we mess up big time. So I just love that. I think that's the thread with the three of them too. Sorry.
Okay, so my following question for you guys is, how did your undergraduate degree in sociology prepare you for graduate school and/or your professional field?
I think that I would say that my sociology undergraduate, so I studied undergrad sociology, majored in that, and then studied urban planning for my graduate studies. And I honestly feel that sociology changed my mindset. It changed kind of the foundation and how I approach problems and how I understand the workings of people in the world. So a lot of that boiled down to classes that I took on globalization, I think, as was mentioned earlier, on agency and access. Sociology really opened my eyes, and when I was an undergrad, got me into activism. And so I started kind of running in those circles and kind of understanding, my voice and the power of my voice. I think it just gave me a really nice foundation into I think what then translated into urban planning and activism, it's kind of consultant activism in a way, for different community members. So again, yeah, it shaped how I think, how I approach problems, my appreciation for impact and change, and the ability for people to do that and to organize themselves and to be able to kind of come together. And we do a lot of work as well in community engagement and community conversations. And I definitely think that the foundation of sociology and understanding social change influences how I perceive community engagement. I think there are a lot of different ways to conduct conversations and engagement, and it can be kind of dry and kind of, standard in a room in a back room at 7 p.m. at night where there are people there, or it can be this really fun, engaging thing out in the streets. And we build in like art into our community engagement so that people want to interact with us. And I think a lot of that comes from understanding activism and change through the sociology lens. And I think that it's really prepared me nicely for the kind of path that I took in urban planning.
I was thinking I was next, sorry. Yeah, so sociology, I think the same thing, the lens definitely, reading about globalization was fascinating. I think tapping into my own story. I know I've mentioned it a lot, but it really, I awoke to what my reality was, because you go along and you grow up a certain way and you're not really open to the rest of what's happening out there. And so it dawned on me in school that I was poor and that I had suffered trauma, and that there was a way to build on that, to be able to make lives better. I was able to, my professor that is one of my mentors, and encouraged me to do a summer internship with SEIU in Chicago. And so I went for nearly 3 months. First time I'd been away from my husband, who I married when, we had been together since we were 14. So it was the longest time I'd been away. And I went to organize home care workers. It was right at the beginning of Obama running for president. And I got to knock on these doors in Southside Chicago, little white girl, bright yellow sports car. No idea what I was doing. People jumping on the hood of my car, yelling at me. I was like, this is crazy. We worked like 10 hours a day, but it was training us on how to ask personal questions, how to organize people from a place of fear to a place of action. And one of the weeks, I remember I walked into this home and it smelled like my house growing up, which smelled like roaches. Like my kitchen growing up when I was a little kid, you turn on the lights, it was Joe's apartment. You guys might be too young for that, but roaches didn't go anywhere. They just hung out. And there were mattresses on the floor, and it slapped me in the face, like this reality of why it had taken me so long to get to school, So I had planned on going to grad school at that point. And then I was like in tears at the airport, like, okay, I've spent 10 years in school. I finally figured out that you can be a community organizer or a labor organizer for a job. Nobody told me that when I was younger, protesting the war. So I was like, okay, I'm going to go and do this. And I had found through one of the classes, this organization called LANE, Los Angeles Alliance for a New Economy. And they do community benefit agreements, which is like, okay, build up downtown, do urban planning, but in return, you have to have local hire, good jobs, a student center. And I was fascinated. So I started doing that as an intern. And I remember my husband was so mad because I was like, I'm going to go do this free internship. He was like, we're dirt poor. Like we can barely pay for our electricity. I was like, I don't care. I want to work for LANE. I know they're the organization for me. And within 3 months, I had a paid position. And I worked my way up to director. And then when there was a seat open on the city council, I was encouraged to run for it because I had been doing the organizing work and the public policy work. And so I learned a lot from partnering those things together. And I'm happy to say that now, while I have not been to grad school, I will be attending my PhD program at UCI in the fall. And so you don't have to do it right away. And you can get to learn a lot of lessons about who you want to be in the world before you go on to grad school. But sociology definitely helped me get comfortable with myself and being able to have conversations with diverse communities. The other piece that I really valued was methods class, which I never did great in math as a kid. So I kind of assumed I would hate data, but I fell in love with it. And I love creating thoughtful surveys that actually give you real results. Sometimes sociologists get asked to create surveys with a certain outcome. And I'm one of the things that drives me crazy. So know your data well, know how to create good data because it helps you tell people's stories better. So yeah, that's my piece. Okay. These Zooms are so quiet. You feel like you're like in a room to yourself.
Yes, they are very quiet, but hopefully they'll start asking some questions. So I think for me, undergrad introduced me to, well, I don't know about introduced me to, but it allowed space for curiosity. Like I was just always curious about human behavior and like, why do people, and so it almost was like a perfect puzzle piece because the stuff that had always been in my brain, it was like, oh, there's this field that you can go into where it's like scientifically already like justified and you can do and find out more information about it. But I graduated from undergrad and I started working. I had a hard time finding a job and I was providing care for a family who had 2 kiddos, picking them up from school. I was 25 at the time, doing homework help, and their dad was a therapist for a mental health agency. And he said, I know you're looking for a job. They're hiring at the agency. I can give you the information. And I was like, yes, I need a full-time job. You know, you hear undergrad degree, you're going to get all these jobs. And then it's like, oh, wait, where are all the jobs? And so I started working for this mental health agency. I was doing like filing, and there was a lot of room for growth at that agency. And I was given those opportunities partially because of my curiosity to like work with people a little more, with the youth, with the parents. At the time, I feel like I was always curious about domestic violence because of my own lived experiences as a kiddo. I just didn't think at the time I wasn't ready for it because it was, I don't even want to say it was too soon. I just didn't know how, and I wasn't ready. And so I shadowed a facilitator for a domestic violence group, in particular our monolingual Spanish speaking women. And my heart just like, I was like, this is my group, but I wasn't ready. And eventually my mentor at the time said, why don't you apply to grad school? Like applications are due in like 2 weeks. I didn't know what that even meant, to be very honest. Like, okay, then what? Like, what does that mean? And so I think I almost fell into grad school by accident because I was bored and I didn't have any more questions to ask in that position. And so my mentor was like, hey, how about you apply to grad school? And what about social work? And I was like, okay, sure, let's do social work. And so I think I got very lucky in having the right people give me direction when I didn't really even understand what my direction was.
Okay, so my next question for you guys is, how did you decide what kind of education or training to pursue in graduate school / after your bachelor's degree? And what was graduate school / preparing for the LCSW exam like?
Okay, so I decided to further study, or to begin studying urban planning after my sociology bachelor, because I was fascinated. I think I kind of mentioned this, but I was fascinated by cities. I grew up in City of Cerritos, and I went to college in the city of Orange, so not very far, about 20 minutes away. And I hadn't, really had the opportunity to travel as a kid. I didn't go anywhere. I didn't like leave the country. And luckily, when I was in college, I had the opportunity to kind of leave the country for a minute. And I realized that the world was so much different than, what I had grown up in for so long. And that fascination with how cities are so different and how they can make you feel a completely different way just based on how they're laid out, was why I kind of decided to move forward in urban planning and understanding urban design. So when I came back, I kind of felt changed, and I knew that I kind of wanted to go on that path. And I worked in my undergrad, when I was getting my sociology degree, I worked for the County of Orange, and we were doing policy change. So I was helping them kind of write policy as an intern. And then I worked with a group called the American Friends Service Committee, which is a Quaker organization in LA. And they're such lovely, peaceful, activists. And we worked on policy change for Guantanamo Bay that was happening at that period in time. And so the policy side of it was really interesting to me. And I knew that that was something you could pursue in planning. But again, I really wanted to kind of look into how I could use my hands and design. And I considered for a long time doing architecture, but it didn't have the same kind of sociological kind of background that I wanted to apply to what I was doing. And so that's kind of why I decided to move in the urban planning path. And, preparing for grad school for planning involved, taking the GRE and studying. I, just got a few books really, and did some work on my own to prepare for the GRE exam. And one thing that I really, I don't know why this ended up happening, but I ended up interviewing different professors at each of the schools that I was interested in. And so I wanted to know, how in depth is your urban design practice? How many classes literally do you offer for design students? Because there are lots of different avenues that you can take. And I found that to be very helpful. And I don't, I would recommend that if you're thinking about looking into grad school, if you're applying, interview the people that are there representing the school, because I think they'll give you a lot more information than maybe some of the stuff that you see on the website, or some of the quotes that they select from students that are going there. It's really informative, and it really helps you kind of pick your path in that direction. Helped me.
Yes, so I mentioned a little bit, but I'm reflecting on the feeling that I needed to go to grad school when I was an organizer in like 2010, 2011. I see we've got a lot of women on the call, and I just want to recognize that I was a community organizer that partnered with labor, and most of the spaces I was in, I was one of the few women in those spaces. And while I had my sociology degree, and I don't mean this to discern anybody, I found that it was very hard to be able to be like, I graduated with my sociology degree. I know how to write surveys, and I know how to do X, Y, and Z. It was very much like their experience trumped mine, even though I graduated when I was 28, 29. However, that was 29. So it took me a while to get through school, like I said. But it was a space that was like hard for me to identify as a professional, as a community organizer, that I loved doing. I loved the work. But when I was at the round table every Monday and we were talking about strategy, it took me 10 times to say something. And then a man would say it in a different way. And it was like, okay, let's unpack what you just said, and let's see how it compares to what I just said. And I tried to start using my sociology degree as a way to demonstrate that I understood what outcomes we were trying to get. And so it was then when I started thinking about going and getting my urban planning degree as well. If I had not have run for office, which was not ever my plan, I would have applied back then. But the seat was open and there was no one running that shared my values. And we had spent, 8 years organizing around worker issues. And I loved public policy in my job. But again, I was still a junior in my job. And so it was very frustrating. When I went and became a council member, it was amazing because I got to write public policy. I drove city council staff crazy because they're like, well, we write the policy, council's part-time. I was like, well, I don't have to work. I get to do this all. My husband was like, just do it for 2 years without another job. So I did more policies than anybody had done in 3 terms in 1 because I loved writing public policy so much. So in the last year, when I really unpacked that, I had an insight and a struggle with how some labor unions were approaching climate and how challenging and epic our climate crisis was. It really impacted me because we then had the pandemic and I was reading articles that said that cities that we have higher density, where we have higher greenhouse gas particulates, we have a higher death rate of COVID. And so it very much became like, we are looking at the effects of climate crisis right now. While we can say that we know that it's hotter summer, people still struggle with it. But that data really messed with me. So I went to UCLA and I literally the day after the city voted to close down for a pandemic, I went online and applied for the certificate program for sustainability at UCLA. Did all of the classes in 6 months, reminded myself how much I loved learning, how much I loved asking questions and putting together, new ideas. And so, but it messed with me also because it was very tangible to somebody that already had a job. So the certificate programs are really for people that are already in a place and they just want to skill up. And that's whenever I decided that I would apply to the PhD programs in UCLA and UCI. I called many professors of both programs, but then I also talked to students. So professors will tell you one thing. One professor was like, we offer the most competitive, package, blah, blah, blah. And then the student's like, look, it's $2K a month. You're not going to be living and eating the cheese that you like on $2K a month. And so it allowed me to really have other questions and thoughts before I finally submitted my applications. And I'll say my husband went to UCI for his sociology PhD. And it was really, really hard for him. It was very, very intense. He's not a competitive person. The process was tough. But one thing I've learned in my 40 years is you got to trust your gut. And you've got to make sure that while you have other people in your ear, that you're making the best decision for you. And so while some people might discourage you from a sociology degree or whatever degree you decide to go on, you really have to sit with yourself and make those decisions. And when you do, you're going to have the best experience possible. So I didn't tell anybody until literally the week before I applied to grad school that I was applying. I spent 6 months talking to people, thinking about it, making sure that I wasn't going to flake on myself. But I just recommend you really do what what you believe is best for you, and then you'll have a great experience.
I shared a little bit about not really knowing I was going to go to grad school. And once I was there, I felt like I was always connected to community organizing. And SC it was called COPA, Community Organizing and Planning Administration. And that's what I wanted to do, but I ended up choosing medical because I thought if that's something I'm destined to fall into or destined to do, then I should try something that I may never be able to do again, which was the medical social work. And it was a trauma center, so that also lured me in. And I finished grad school, and again, it's like, okay, where are all these jobs people are talking about, right? We get these degrees for jobs, and then it's like, well, where are these jobs? And for me, it was challenging because out of grad school with your master's in social work, a lot of the positions are for clinical work, which is therapy. I didn't want to do the clinical route. at the time. I just thought like, that's just not where my skill is. I need to move, I need to do things. And so I didn't get a job for a couple months because I did not want to do the clinical. And I graduated from there in 2010. And just now, last November, I started to do the clinical work because I came around to it. And not in a bad way. You don't ever have to get licensed with your master's in social work. I honestly didn't think I would ever, but now I'm feeling like, okay, I have the experience now where I can, I don't know, it just feels right at this point. And so I do feel at times that I was a little late in that game, but like you said, just follow your own path. Some people did it right out of grad school and that worked really for them. If I had done it right out of grad school, I probably would have been miserable because it wasn't fast enough for me. You know, I've gotten a little older, I've gotten a little less energized. And so it just fits really well for me at this point. And it's going to take me a while. If you work full time to get your hours done, it'll take about 2 to 3 years. I'm doing part-time, so it's going to probably take me about 4 to 5 years. But I think of it more as those hours. That individual hour with each individual person is gold, right? It can take me 500 years. And there's now this kind of shift in our field that's instead of becoming licensed, it's becoming a coach, because if you're licensed, you're only licensed for the state. And California and New York are the most difficult. I have a girlfriend who's moving to Florida and she's like, I pretty much can't work because I'm not going to have my license. And so people are now doing coaching, which means that you can coach across state lines, internationally. And so I thought for a second, why am I getting licensed? But for me, it's because you can learn so much in that process. It's not so much like what is going to happen in the end. It's what am I learning in this process? So I'm still at the very beginning of my hours, but again, it's that privilege to be able to share that that time with individuals. And I have an 8-year-old client and I have a 50-year-old client right now. So I still get to work with the full range of individuals, and that needs assessment is coming in. What is the access to resources in their community? COVID, right? Like I had a client who, she's like, I have no money for food. I have nothing, but I'm also testing positive for COVID. She's like, I can't even go to a food bank. So what do we do in those situations where usually like these resources are available for some people? This has really been very different for individuals. So that's kind of my path.
So how has the pandemic affected your job/job market?
In March through May of 2020, like 80% of our projects paused. So if 90% of our projects are with city agencies, and so that means the city of Los Angeles, LA Metro, or city of Glendale. You think about government, and it's hard to shift government because it's such a big entity from practicing in person to then suddenly going virtual. And so that transition alone was very difficult for a lot of public agencies, I'll say, and who are contracted with. So there's a big pause. But then, which I think is a positive out of that, is that suddenly governments were like, oh, we can do this. We actually have all of the resources. We can do the shift. We can both have a physical presence in our communities, but we can also have a virtual one, which we didn't have before. And people didn't have an option to go to a council meeting virtually or go to a planning commission virtually. And so then all of a sudden things started kind of rearing back. But it changed also the interpretation, I think, which in a good way, that people were ignoring for so long, is that everyone had access to digital, which is not true, and the digital divide is very real. And I think there's been this kind of undercurrent of equity planning that has been, rising and gaining in importance for many years now. But I think that it kind of catapulted that to the forefront for people, because all of a sudden, cities were saying, okay, we'll just join this virtual meeting, and yet they weren't addressing digital inequities. And so it forced them then to say, okay, well, now we actually have to kind of confront this inequity that has been an inequity for so long. So it changed how governments interacted, I like perceived how they interacted with their own community members. It also changed a lot of what I do is in transportation planning and transportation design. And because COVID essentially meant that there were fewer cars on the street, which, you know, from a personal perspective, I was excited about. It also meant that there was more demand for slow streets, for people streets, for places for people to walk to in their communities that felt safe, like they weren't going to get run over by a car. And so there are a lot of very quick kind of pilot projects that cities were doing that tested out, you know, different ways to slow streets down so that the people who live there feel like they would be comfortable taking their kids out on a bike ride or taking their kids out for a walk, or allowing, you know, their teenagers to kind of go and hang out because they weren't afraid really that there were going to be speeding cars nearby. And I think that changed a lot of perception about, especially in Los Angeles, just about the need for speed in, you know, and from a vehicular standpoint. It changed expectations in, I think, a good way. Now it's changing again, right? You know, things are kind of getting back to closer to what they were, you know, in early 2020. But I think that there's been like a paradigm or a mind shift that's happened among both people who live in the community and in the government as well. So it's changed kind of how we can approach projects and how and also how we communicate with everyone who's living in the neighborhoods that we're planning for. So a lot has changed, but you know, I'm trying to be an optimist and say that it, you know, it's also been good, I think, and kind of catapulted the profession forward in a way that I don't think it would have without it.
You're absolutely right, Shannon. I was on the council during the, you know, first year of the pandemic, and we were able to roll out Safe Streets, which was different in every district, but in my neighborhood, it meant closing down 2 streets so that only the residents that live there were able to drive down it. It meant we had parklets outside. I mean, we live in California, we should be eating outside, right? But now we have all these parklets and outside spaces that small businesses were able to, in many cases, keep. In some cases, they had to reduce, but it also had this conversation about land use in a sense, like in Long Beach, if you've, you know, been to my district, my area, where Retro Row and everything is, it's parking impacted. And so the fight was like, wait, you're going to take out a parking spot to give that restaurant something? That's public space. We should have access to it. And so we had to have a lot of these difficult conversations, but in hindsight, we have all the parklets except for maybe 3 because of construction. And we operate in that space very differently. So these cute little, like my favorite Honduran place that has 0 windows, looks like a place people would deal drugs out of, now has an outside patio that is literally packed every single weekend with people enjoying like the most awesome Honduran food. So I had to like chime in on that because I love what we did with Safe Streets. My work in doing voter engagement, civic engagement, and community engagement. So a couple of projects I've had during the pandemic was we won 3 city council seats in the city of Santa Monica, unseating 3 incumbents. Whether that was a good thing or not, history will tell, but that's what we did. And it was at a time when people felt like you couldn't go door to door to talk to voters because of the mask and the 6 feet distance. In the city of Long Beach, we were working on a city council race against an incumbent that it had a lot of, he had voted against panic buttons for housekeepers. Like we had all the reasons in the world to try to have a woman in that seat. And the people leading the ground campaign in Long Beach said, well, it's COVID, we can't knock on doors. But I led the campaign in Santa Monica and I said, Boston people with sticks, we'll knock on the door, we'll walk back 6 feet, we'll double mask. But I know in order to win political campaigns, you have to talk to voters one-on-one. Again, it goes back to that personal story and understanding why people might vote or get to the polls. And in Long Beach, we have a history of low voter turnout. My very first campaign here, we had 7% turnout, 7% turnout. And so for the pandemic, it really impacted that election cycle. And I think we would have been better off if we could have gone door to door in a strong way because people don't communicate the same way over the phone or on an online survey. The second piece was we all went through redistricting. So I'm not sure how many of you guys are familiar with redistricting, but it's where we, the census data comes in and then we recalculate how many people to evenly divide up in between city council districts, your state senate, your assembly. And California completely shifted. The census was completely messed up in the middle of the pandemic because we had Trump that was instilling fear in our immigrants, and they were not filling out surveys. So we know that the pandemic did keep us from being able to do our best at reaching many people, particularly vulnerable populations that might have a reason not to engage with any government official at all. We do redistricting every 10 years, and my firm was brought on to do a little bit of community organizing, but not the entire outreach. The team that was brought on to do the entire outreach in our region hosted events and literally had 2 or 3 people show up. 10 years ago, when I participated, these meetings had 300-400 people show up. And so we had a process where a very small group of people have now drawn the lines. In a city in Long Beach, we have 64% of the people here that are people of color. And so in a perfect world, you would have 5 seats that somebody of color or marginalized community could win in. But that's not what happened at the end of the day, because we weren't able to outreach to some of those folks. And so those are real tangible things that I look at and I say, this is how the pandemic negatively affected us. I think the positive impacts are, I've got clients in Belize and we're able to talk about best practices in Long Beach when it comes to climate change. And it's not even a conversation if we're in a different country or place. I think the self-care question is up next, but it was a time when I stopped going out to eat and I had my small group of people and we were able to really rest together and build community in a different way. So I think moving forward from the pandemic, we're getting ready to have a women's event in Long Beach at the end of the month around women in the pandemic and resiliency with some of our state electeds, which is what are we doing? We know women have been carrying the brunt of this pandemic. I'm a single mom with a 9-year-old that, took all of her classes for over a year in her bedroom with very little access to friends. Our moms are nurses, they're home care workers, they're daycare workers, they're the women that are on the front lines, really. And so I think there are some big impacts that we as a society, if we actually take the responsibility to look at, instead of just jumping back into the full-fledged work, we can make some real changes to how we operate. I'm always hopeful on that, but okay, that's mine.
So the pandemic, the lockdown really impacted our families. We know that there was an increase in substance use, drugs, alcohol. There was an increase in abuse in the home. So child abuse, elder abuse, domestic violence or intimate partner violence. But I think those are very, I don't want to say specific examples, because instead of referring to mental illness as mental illness, I call it mental wellness, right? Which kind of makes it more less taboo. A lot of our communities view mental health therapy as something negative. And so if we view it as mental wellness, that kind of allows us all to have access to it. And we all just live through the beginning part of a pandemic, right? Some of us are still very much being impacted by it. And so I think our field, or social work, mental health, people experience loss. A lot of people experience loss. And so this is almost like a case study to what we can understand about human behavior. And I think it also lent itself to the idea of productivity and what does it mean to be productive in our society. I shared I was kind of a busybody, and up until the pandemic, I was that busybody, and now it's well, wait, why don't we slow down? And so I was in a group the other day, and they asked well, what is your hope in terms of the field post-pandemic, or for yourself, the goal, your vision? That's what it was. And it's well, to stay slow, to keep it slow, to not feel like we have to keep rushing. Clearly that wasn't working for me. And this feels a lot more me. So I think that this field really helps with mental wellness, loss, grief and loss. what does productivity mean to us? Because when, things hit the fan, we shared with one another. It wasn't like, well, let's go out and, be as productive as possible. It was like, hold on, let's slow it down. Like, what's really significant to us? And so I think that because I'm just transitioning into the clinical work, I think that's kind of the impact overall of the field, because I think we've all been impacted by just like the ins and outs of that pandemic of again, productivity, and I love that I'm seeing more of it now. Like, well, why is my value connected to my productivity? And I love that so much, because we are so much more than just our job. We're multifaceted, and I just love that that's kind of gaining momentum.
Okay, so my next question for you guys is, what advice do you have for those interested to pursuing a career in your field?
I just want to start and say, before I get into that, Janine, the Slow Streets or Safe Streets Long Beach was so amazing. And honestly, I think one, if not the best in the county of, implementation of, it just was so successful, so rapid rollout. It was just well done. It was great.
Yeah, well, and it was in large part because we'd been doing the work for a while, and we had already started creating a policy on how to fast track parklets.
Yeah.
So having that policy in place, again, cutting, I don't want to sound like a Republican or something, but cutting red tape to allow us to do good development will impact things like that. It'll impact affordable housing. But our public works team at the time, we have a new director, but our old director was awesome. Thank you.
Stellar. Okay, so advice. Number one thing I always say, which I think you've probably heard before, is just take advantage of being a student. So you have like the ability to ask questions in a way that you probably won't have always. So for example, if there's a company that you're interested in, or if there is someone doing work that you really like, you can ask questions of that person in a way that is very different than you asking questions later on when you're interviewing for them. You could be really real with them. And I feel that the student card that you can hold up right now and the questions that you can ask, you can't always get those kinds of responses or your foot in the door in that same sense. Also, getting your foot in the door is much easier if you're a student and you just want to have an informational interview, or you want to get to know a company or someone in the profession. Just use it up. Do that as much as you can. I wish I had done it more, honestly, than I did. So definitely just ask questions, find a group or an organization. If you're interested in urban planning, this is for if you're interested in pursuing urban planning, find organizations that you like, local community work, get involved at the local level, try to understand, what type of planning you're interested in. There are so many different fields at USC. I think there are 5, if I can remember, different tracks you can go in, one of which is urban design. If you're really into sustainability and kind of green infrastructure and climate change, you can go into that world. You can go into economics and land use, or you can focus on community engagement or transportation planning if you're interested in transit and rail lines, etc., or urban design, like I said. But again, just kind of explore the different aspects in each of the professions I think that we're talking about today. There are so many different paths that you can take, and exploring the different paths and interviewing and asking people who are working in those respective fields, questions that are really true to you, that you don't have to put up a front when you're a student. You can ask away. So if you're interested in that, call me if you want to talk. We can chat if you're interested in urban planning, or call whoever that you kind of see active in your community that you are inspired by.
Advice, definitely. Nobody gets treated like a student after that. It's your opportunity. I just latched on to a professor, and it was so out of my personality because I didn't consider myself a good student until Cal State Long Beach. But after every class, I would talk with him. We talk about projects. I had I'd gone in and talked to other professors that the class never lined up, but the books they were writing fascinated me. Like Gary Heitrick was never my professor, but he ended up getting me an award, whenever I graduated. So it's like, just get in there and talk to people. This is your time to ask as many questions and to show that you're interested. Heitrick's my homie. Yeah, way back. But it's people like that that really inspire you, and they'll help you get involved. And Norma Chinchilla was the one that referred me for an internship with Lane, which I didn't know about until after I got it. And it was it was a student internship for credit. And then it was a free internship, unpaid, for 3 months. And then they sent me to Emeryville. And so lots of times in my life, I felt terrified of taking that step. Like, I'm going to go to Emeryville with a bunch of strangers I've never met for 3 weeks to knock on doors. But I did it, and it's like taking that risk. The Chicago risk, I almost didn't do. I almost pulled out the last minute. So take risk, take every internship that you think aligns with your values. And what I recognize now in my life, which I had a hard year on council that was very, 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 very difficult. My mental health was the worst it had ever been. But I wrote down, I had somebody tell me, write down 50 accomplishments you've done. And I was like, I don't have 50, and then when you realize all the things that you've done, like going to school and doing the Chicago thing and very small things, you get the confidence up to go out and put yourself out there again. So just keep applying for things, make sure that you're in spaces and having conversations. My firm has some internship programs. If you want to go online and look, if you're interested in community organizing, climate work, voter engagement work. My vision is that everyone that comes through my firm, my job is to get them a full-time job. I'm not a firm that's going to be like a big corporate firm, because we work on a sliding scale with nonprofits, but giving people that skill set is something that's really important to me. And now my last 3 people that were interns work for the mayor, the vice mayor, and a city council member. So just take those opportunities. And again, be true to yourself at the end of the day.
In terms of social work, I would definitely recommend volunteering. I think finding out what population you're not so into is equally as important as the populations you are into, or that you have a preference for, and don't assume, right? Like, I know I have a girlfriend who works with older adults, and she initially was like, no, I don't want to work with the older adult population. That's just not my thing. And then she did it, I think, for an internship, and she loved it. Like, she's like, I can't ever see myself not doing it anymore. And so give yourself a chance in terms of that. I think also volunteering can give you maybe an advantage when you're applying to transfer, and also just maybe even job opportunities. I think that our field is, there's like this assumption that social work doesn't make a lot of money, and you're not wrong about it, but I think that we shouldn't continue to say that that's okay, right? So I think that we need to advocate for our compensation. Yes, starting off, you maybe start off at 40, 45, maybe 50, but you can exceed 100,000. Think about if you want to work for nonprofits or for-profit, ethically as well as financially, right? Like, these are all things that are really important. And I think also self-care, right? We can't burn ourselves out, because then we're not going to be of service to anybody. And so really taking care of ourselves, setting up boundaries, maybe don't have your email on your phone, right? Like, we don't get paid for that. Why do we all have our emails on I know I have it, but like, why do we have it? And so I'm also really mindful of when I send emails, because it's somebody's Sunday night, right? Like, it's going to make them all anxious, and being really aware of not just our own self-care, but of others' self-care, but also realizing that it's our own responsibility and other people's responsibility to put their own boundaries. So I think that those would be my 3: volunteer or get involved in some way, really advocating for your own worth in this field, because if we allow ourselves, we'll just continue to get, there's this idea that like, if we do it for the passion. Well, yes, we're passionate about it, but we also need to pay our bills, So making sure that we ensure that we're worth this compensation, and then the self-care.
So talking about self-care, we know that the work that you all do can be very stressful as it isn't so important, impacts so many lives. So we'd like to know, how do you guys practice self-care?
So as a small business owner, there are an infinite number of hours that can be worked in the day, right? So the day never actually ends unless I decide that it ends, which is really, one of the fundamental components, I think, of my own self-care, which is that, for me, that's spending time with my family, it's reading, it's staying active, and it's really holding myself to a work-live balance, but also setting the example too for employees at my firm. If I'm not practicing that, then I feel that my employees are going to feel that they have to work themselves to the bone as well, which I don't want either. So it's kind of setting an example and also living that example. I enjoy bike riding, and it thankfully kind of gives me insight into the work that I do. I listen to music, I listen to the news, I like being tuned into the world. It kind of satisfies the sociology and political science kind of brain that I've developed over time. It kind of just balances. So it's not always about the specific work that is going on, but it's about resting. And I think, Yvette, you were mentioning that earlier, just how important it is and how nice it was that the pandemic, in a sense, gave us a moment to kind of give that back to ourselves in ways that we didn't before. And so it was kind of a wake-up call, and it's been nice to hold both myself to that and then the rest of the people in the company that I work with. So
Yeah, I definitely, the physical exercise I'm not good on. That rarely works. I go like maybe 2 months. Like if it's good, I'll walk down to yoga on the beach, but then I ultimately stop, and then it's like 6 months until I do it again. Reading, spending time with my daughter, my family. One thing that we love about going on vacation is it's like you just kind of hunker down and you play board games or cards or whatever, but it's rare that we actually do that at home. So yesterday was one of those days where, and her dad and I co-parent like rock stars, but it was my weekend, and he was like, let's go for a hike and let's go do this. I was like, we're tired. We want a home day. And he was like, it's the weekend though, we should go have fun. I was like, no, we want a home day. And we played board games and we took naps. Like I fell asleep on the couch for like 3 hours yesterday. It was amazing. I have 3 girlfriends that we go to wine country and just like check out. The last 2 times we've done that, we actually got clients. So that actually worked. We go to Deer Park Monastery down in San Diego, which is silent meditation retreat. Every Sunday, you can go down there and start at 7 a.m. with a silent walk and then have food with the monks. And it's pretty awesome. And then the other thing I like to do is I like to go to the Korean spa and get a good scrub down, because it kind of like makes you feel fresh the next day. And I have a therapist every week. So those things are all important. I have different friends, as I get older in life. I find I have different friends that help me out in different ways. And I think the meaning of friendship changes for me as I go through different experiences. And so knowing like, I have a friend that if I'm overworked and I feel like I've got a deadline, she's like, send me whatever, I'll do the PowerPoint for you. Kick me $25, I don't care, I'll do some work. I've got the friend that'll bring the bottle of wine over if I need it. I have the friend that'll take me to a science museum. And so I think it's also knowing that while you need alone time, that I have a cadre of people that I can turn to if I need that kind of day. But really, it's my kiddo. She's super fun.
I think self-care is so important. And, I love the books. I love the movement, walking in the morning, taking the dogs. I think dogs or pets in general are so amazing. But I also think it's really important that when we talk about self-care, some of us avoid the things we have to do. And sometimes self-care means doing the things that's on our list. right? Like if you're always grinding, then yes, taking a step back. But if we're always avoiding, sometimes you just got to buckle down and get it done. So that also will help us with our mental health, because if we're just constantly adding to our list of to-dos and maybe we're anxious or we have anxiety, like that's going to do more harm than good. Moving our bodies can be really important. Like we know that that's somatic, right? Like we need to bring it back to like childhood movement. So I mean, I definitely love books, music. I used to go to concerts. I don't know when the next concert will be because of people, but we'll get there, I think. And just again, like the idea of community, or if you've ever been at a show and you look at like the mosh pit, it's like that in itself can be sociological. It's like cultural anthropology. Like, what are these people doing? And some mosh pits, they like take care of each other and you gotta go, you pick up people and you go, and others, it's, you know, so yeah, music, books. I'm not very good at watching television. Like that just like, it's too slow for me. So yeah, I don't know. I don't know. I can't think of anything creative, to be very honest, in terms of self-care. But also remembering that it doesn't have to cost a lot of money. I think also there's this like pressure that we are gotta go do things. Sometimes it's like sitting in the car for 10 minutes before you like put on your next hat and keep it moving. So I think whatever we need in that moment is good.
I went to see English Beat last week and I skanked, which I have not done in like 15 years, and it felt freaking amazing. So yes, music, that is the goal.
I totally agree. And it's a cultural universal, right? Like it's a universal thing that we do with music and move our bodies. So absolutely.
Yeah, so that wraps up all of our questions. Thank you guys for your input and sharing your personal insights. It really helps others inspire. I mean, it helps me, it inspires me at least to see what you guys have done with sociology and the different pathways you took to help others. It's very nice to hear. Thank you.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you to everyone. I know we had one lingering question. I think Renisha has maybe checked out, but like I said, we will be recording and posting and sharing this. So she was asking you, Yvette, if you could elaborate more on the coaching, like maybe how is that distinct from the licensure? Is it basically the same, but just sort of under a different, title?
I think it's like the easiest way I can explain it is it's a loophole that people have found so that they can provide services across state lines or in other parts of the country or the world, I guess. But it's not therapy. You can't call it as therapy. And it doesn't require a degree. I mean, any one of us, any one of you could say, I want to coach. And then you just coach somebody into whatever you believe to be true. But I think that if I ever end up in coaching, I think the licensure process will help with that, because I want to be able to provide good care. You might see somebody who does like hypnosis, which is very different from hypnotherapy. So it really, I think it's a loophole more so than anything else, but I'm finding that more and more people are doing it. I'm also seeing a lot of the coaches have their licensure or had it at some point, because with licensure, you have to keep renewing it. And it's, it costs money. And so if you don't, licensure could really help you if you want to do your own private practice. Outside of that, it's really up to you if you want to continue that. I just think that the experience in itself is worth it, because it's just so much I'm totally stretching in this new endeavor. It's almost painful how hard it is, but I think that just means that I'm doing good work in terms of like learning and trying to do right by my clients. One of the main reasons I was a little resistant to clinical work is because I feel like sometimes people are just diagnosed just because, and that's just not my thing. And so sometimes they say, oh, this diagnosis is kind of just like your basic. And I say, no, like if they're not presenting with those symptoms, why are we going to diagnose individuals just because, right? That doesn't feel ethical to me. So really creating or diving into this institution, but still doing it in your own way, I think is really important. So yeah, that's the coaching. It's the loophole.
Got it. Thanks for elaborating on that. Was there anyone else who had any other questions? Feel free to drop them in the chat or mute now if you'd like to ask anyone a follow-up question. I think some of you mentioned sort of where you went. You know, all of our students pretty much are planning to transfer. And so that it might help also if you could share what your undergraduate experience, where you went, and you know, what helped you make that decision as well. I know, Janine, you mentioned that you did community college and so eventually transferred as well. So if anyone wanted to share about that.
Sure, yeah. For undergrad, I went to Chapman University in Orange. And that was really informed because I wanted to do film initially, and that was what they had a good film school there. But their sociology department ended up being fantastic. So I did Chapman University, and then for grad school, I went to USC. I had no intention of going to USC, didn't think I could afford USC at all, and just kind of applied because why not? And USC had a great scholarship program, and so I ended up going there completely kind of in shock, but wasn't really the plan. So what's nice is that, you know, you never know. So if there is a place that you're interested in going to and you think, you know, well, like I did, I couldn't afford USC at all, you know, just try and see what's available, and sometimes they surprise you. So
yeah, like I said, I went to Cal State Long Beach. When I moved to Irvine, I went to whatever community college it is down there. Just be very careful when you transition to a different school, because I don't know if it was me or the system, and because I had out of state credit, so I ended up having to take a lot of classes twice. Like my English classes, I had A's in all my English classes. Then they had me take them over again at community college because I was trying to get them out of the way. Then when I got to Cal State Long Beach, they were like, you didn't have to retake those classes. So just make sure that you have a good person helping you transition those courses. So
I think I shared that I did Cal State Northridge, and then I took a break in between 3 years. And then I did the Master's of Social Work at USC. And much like Shannon, I thought, well, let's just try it. Let's, you know, throw my name in the game. And I was like, wait, I got in. I wonder if they realized that they made a mistake. Like I had a lot of that going on in my brain. Like, I think they made a mistake. I got to get in before they realize it. And so this like imposter idea really played out in my brain. Like, or people would say like, oh, you got into SC, you must be really smart. And I'd always say like, no, I just got really lucky. They made a mistake. But I think also being able to say like, yeah, I rocked it, right? Like I got in. I don't know if it was a miss. No, don't like. But I think that talking about the imposter ideas of like faking it is so important, because so many of us feel it and we don't really talk about it. Like I remember sitting in grad school thinking, I'm not going to make this, like crying. I'm just not going to do this. I don't know how. And then you do, make it. So I think that giving yourself that credit and being gentle, I think is really important. I know that there's a question. Do you have to go to grad school to get your master's degree in social work? So the grad school is the master's. Yeah. So it's what you would go after your bachelor's for. So you get your bachelor's and then you can go on to master's. You don't really need a doctorate in social work unless you want to teach or do research. But the licensure is kind of like the epitome, like the peak of what people strive to do, unless they want to, again, teach or do research.
Yeah, so just to clarify on some of the jargon, grad school is like the umbrella term for a master's degree, for a doctorate degree, right? So we often use those terms interchangeably. Good question, Maya. I saw that Sarah, speaking of coaches and the importance of mentors and people, guiding you along the right way. Sarah, our success coach for the behavioral and social sciences, is dropping some info about events coming up. Sarah, can you tell us more about that?
Yes, hello everyone. My name is Sarah Chavez. I'm the Social and Behavioral Sciences Success Coach, as someone said earlier, the coaches. I work here at Cerritos, and I've been a Success Coach for a couple months now, but I have about 20 years of experience at Student Services. We are going to be having some March events because we want you to continue to march to your success, because your success is our number one priority. We also want you to know that if you need to speak to a counselor or connect with someone, I am your go-to person. So please reach out to me. We have some appointments open. Effective today, we are now 50% back on campus. Of course, you have to follow COVID protocols, but we're here on campus and we would like to see you and have you visit us. And to the presenters, I just want to let you know, I can feel your aura all the way here at Cerritos College. And I can feel it going in my heart. And I think someone said, you got to be present. And I always tell everyone, there's a difference between being present somewhere versus actually being present, right? Because it takes a whole heart to be present in mind, spirit, and soul. But I feel you guys, I hear you guys, and thank you for all of the amazing feedback that you guys gave students. Thank you for being true to yourselves, and thank you for being difference makers in the world that is very much in need of some difference. So thank you once again. But I am your success coach. So if you need an appointment, prepare for summer registration. Summer registration dates will be posted on March 31st in your My Cerritos portal. So please get connected and reach out to make those appointments if needed. Thank you, Joy. I appreciate the time.
Absolutely. Very well said, Sarah. Thank you again to Yvette, Janine, Shannon, and everyone who's joined us today. It's really great hearing your stories, and I'm sure students are feeling more motivated. If I wasn't already majoring in sociology, I would definitely major in it now. So, thank you for all that you shared. And again, I want to reiterate what both Shannon and Yvette said about stretching yourself in terms of where you think you can apply. Definitely reach out to the transfer counselors that we have on campus. They will, let you know about the process, the deadlines, and all of that. So please don't feel alone in the process. Sarah can connect you to them as well. As she said, you can go to her and she will direct you to all of the resources that we have on campus. Thanks everyone again for your time. We will be posting this onto the Sociology Club YouTube page, and I'll share that link after as well. Wishing everyone a great rest of your week. Very appreciative for your time.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you guys.
Nice to meet everyone.
Likewise. Have a good evening.
You too.